All right, nice. We're live. There's no one here, so I'm just gonna chill in my room. I got this. All right, this is good. It'll give me some time to figure out all these settings, which are substantial. All right. Oh wow. Okay, I can watch myself on YouTube in one window and talk in the other. I should probably not do that because that will be very odd, distracting. That's cool. Anyone else? Anyone here yet? Let's see. We got 2 viewers. All right. What's up, people? Talk to me. I guess you can talk in the group chat, or you could, if you wanted to, actually come into the hangout with like your own avatar or whatever, but you don't have to do that if you don't want to. What's up? There's one viewer. What's going on? Who are you? What are you into? What's on your mind? There's a little chat if you want to just type it. You can do that. All right, maybe the one viewer here just likes to watch people sit in their rooms. I really shouldn't call this my room. It's actually more like the study or the office room. We just set it up. It's pretty nice. Let's see. Some people talking to me on Twitter. All right. Someone's asking me some questions. Talk about how communism works. I'm still trying to figure that one out. Yeah. Tell me about it. So is everyone who calls themselves communists. Loretta jokes. That's 2 more friends than some of us got. Yeah, fair enough. Well, if you don't have that many friends, Loretta, come into the chat. Maybe I'll be your friend. I don't want to just say I'll be friends with anyone, because if you're not cool, I shouldn't be friends with you. And that would, be an insult to everyone. But if you're cool, you might just have a friend in me. All right. All right. Okay. Well, that's one question. We can talk about that in a second. Communism. See if gotta just make sure all my devices are set up, working well. I got my little audio signal thing, Google Hangouts. This Google Hangouts software is pretty good. It's pretty legit. It's like a lot of functionality for just a free little thing. I want to know who's this one viewer though, because I don't want to talk to this one viewer about things people are asking me on Twitter. Oh, actually, that one viewer might be me in my other window, because I have it set up as a test. Oh, I got a question down there. Okay. I see. I don't know how to use this. Someone asked me a question about my opinion on, I know that person, but I don't know how to say their name. Last name Yudkowsky, the AI expert theorist. Okay, let me make sure that I have all this text set up correctly so I can follow along with people's questions in different places, because I almost missed that question. So, yes, okay, the chat is here. All right, we got 3 viewers now. Excellent. Now I can actually start talking and not feel like a weirdo talking to myself. I'm going to hope that the 2 viewers here are the person who, at least one of them, is the person who asked me the question about Yudkowsky. And someone else asked me a question about Uh, yeah, communism, how that works. Good question, but I do have some thoughts. So we have some content. I'm just kind of waiting for a few viewers before we begin the show. Or not really a show, it's a hangout. Also, I'm trying to make sure that I got this set up. All right, 2 viewers. Excellent. Talk to me. Someone type something. Just want to make sure that I'm not talking to myself alone. So that would be quite sad. It's telling me that the bit rate is lower than the recommended bit rate. Whatever. Let's roll with it. Can't be that bad. All right. All right. I think we basically got this going. So got my little drink here. Nothing too high test, I assure you. I guess I'll just start talking about whatever. Like I said, I have some questions that people asked. I'll jot those down. But, may or may not get to them because I don't even know if they're in this room. So I'm just going to talk about whatever. But I will eventually get to those questions. So what's up, people? It's kind of weird that I'm just sitting in my room and doing nothing. And I got a few people watching me. It's also this is kind of a difficult thing to get off the ground, like when you first start recording, when you don't know if there's a few people in the room or not, what do you talk about? Z-Hops is still there. Okay, cool. Good to know. So Z-Hops, I think you might be the only person in the room with me. That's totally cool. That's more than enough. You only need one person to talk to. I think we just got another viewer, but that's cool. Matt Earnshaw, drop in around 10. No biggie. Whatever you want, man. I'll be here for a little bit. Honestly, I'll probably be here just like killing time, chilling, working on my computer, regardless. So, all right, Matt, in 10 minutes. I'll see you. See you then. That's fine. Doesn't matter. I'm just gonna be chilling in my little office study room anyway, regardless, even if there's no one here. I'll just be doing my own thing so people could pop in and talk to me whenever they want. Nothing too exciting. But right. Okay. So Z-Hops, thanks for joining me. Thanks for still being here. Yeah. So Yudkowsky, I don't know his work like much better than, the average person who kind of reads like Less Wrong and reads about artificial intelligence in a semi-regular way. I'm not an expert or anything, but I do kind of follow debates about, rationalism and artificial intelligence. So I definitely don't have a particularly well-informed view or reading of him or his work, but I can just tell you my opinions and thoughts or whatever. Yeah, I think he's super smart and super interesting. I mean, I remember reading a few of his more popular posts on Less Wrong. By the way, I'm not really like that deep in Less Wrong either. I've never like written on there or anything like that, but I have come across it recently, and I've read a lot of it, and I think it's pretty cool and interesting. So yeah, I saw his posts on there, and I've read a few of his papers from this like research institute that he, I guess, like started or works with or whatever. The MIRI group, MIRI. Yeah, I don't really have too much to say, but it seems like he's definitely legit, like a super smart, super ahead of the curve guy. I mean, I think that a lot of the debates around artificial intelligence are very ambiguous. I think it's far more confusing and unclear, and the certainty is far greater, I think, than a lot of people think. Personally, my sense is that even the smartest people in the world of artificial intelligence are, they're doing their best to say interesting and, reasonable things about this like crazy new set of, impending possibilities. But my sense is that even the smartest people working on AI are my sense is just that the domain itself is subject to an extraordinary kind of uncertainty, basically. So I think like people like Bostrom and Yudkowsky are super interesting, brilliant people, really kind of advancing those debates and helping us think about it in different ways. But to be honest, I don't take any of them too seriously. I don't take sort of any one particular intellectual who's working on AI. I just have a kind of deep skepticism towards a lot of it. Um, yeah, I don't. Yeah, I think the reason why would be. I mean, I'd be curious to hear whatever you all think. Obviously, you're asking the questions for a reason. So if you want to type something in, I'd be curious to hear, and I bounce back my thoughts too. But or also, I think you can come in the hangout if you wanted to talk, but lots of people probably wouldn't want to do that. Yeah, my sense is the reason why is because precisely what makes artificial intelligence so interesting and uh, fascinating and troubling and worrisome is precisely that it consists in all of these sort of uncertain possibilities that we it exceeds our capacity to pin things down. Like that's exactly why it's so interesting, and why whether you're kind of optimistic about it or pessimistic about it, you're able to kind of invest in the future of artificial intelligence, your greatest hopes or dreams for humanity, or your greatest fears. Um, it's sort of this undecidable or underdetermined um, uh, kind of space of ideas and possibilities that's characterized by so much uncertainty that you're able to basically pretty convincingly build pretty intelligent kinds of stories around what's going to happen, and it's possible for us to kind of imagine them being plausible, and yet they're extremely hard to really pin down, and it's hard to definitively refute anything precisely because we don't know, and it's so easy to kind of invest deep-seated emotional and ideological aspects of your worldview in it without necessarily knowing that you're doing it, precisely because it exceeds our capacities. So that's kind of my sense, is that like what is so alluring about the artificial intelligence debates is precisely what makes it kind of uniquely hard for us to be very confident about any of the different kind of intellectuals who are focusing on it. And that's not a very satisfying answer, but whenever I read any of the stuff by people like Yudkowsky and Bostrom and all of these different types of people really trying to think about how these scenarios are going to play out, they all kind of have the sense of science fiction to me. Not that none of them will happen, but rather that it's all like really, really underpowered human guesswork, basically, is my sense out of all of that. I hope that kind of answers your question, or just shares with you what I think about it. Let's see. People are asking me, someone else is asking me, Joel Williamson, why is it anarchism important, and why are you an anarchist? That's a good question. Both are good questions. I would really love for people to write comments and stuff. Like, I don't mind doing a kind of Q&A type of thing, but I wasn't exactly gearing up for that. I was thinking more like I'm curious to know what other people are thinking, and have a kind of group conversation. Anyway, I'm happy to answer your questions in the meantime, but people, you should kind of just chime in with what you think. And I'm curious to know, like, who are the people in the room. I see there's like 5 viewers now, so that's cool. It's building some momentum. Excellent. So in the meantime, I'll answer these questions, but chime in with like who you are, what's going on, what are you doing, how you feeling tonight, where are you, anything you feel like sharing. I'm curious to know who the 5 people are that are hanging out with me. So the question that I was just asked by Joel Williamson is, why is anarchism important, and why am I an anarchist? Those are interesting questions, but I would say that, one, I'm, like many anarchists, I don't really identify as an anarchist. I wouldn't call myself an anarchist exactly. I think that a lot of people who you would call anarchists don't call themselves anarchists, precisely because of why you think of them as anarchists. A kind of refusal to a kind of lack of interest in labels and that sort of thing. Wanting to kind of be free of labels, and to not be pinned down by different kinds of constraints is like an obvious kind of aspect of the anarchist spirit, if you will. So it's kind of an irony, but I guess you could call me an anarchist. Some people would, and in terms of like what I actually think, I guess a lot of it could be boiled down to a kind of anarchist summary, but I don't really think with that word very much, and I don't really I don't self-describe with that word, and just for what it's worth. So the more substantive part of the question, though, is like, why is anarchism important? Well, giving you the caveat that I'm not really like an anarchist, or I'm not really trying to go to bat for anarchism. I don't really care. I could tell you like why it's important. The reason why it's important is that it represents, a certain space in kind of the modern radical left uh, traditions, let's say, that is like a really necessary kind of antidote to authoritarian left wing tendencies. So that's, I mean, just historically, that's one reason anarchism is super important, because it's basically, anarchism basically names the, um, the tendency within kind of the modern left tradition to kind of uh, protest and stop when left groups tend to become kind of uh, overly deferential to particular centralized, uh, hubs of power within kind of the left wing trajectory, or I think that makes sense. So yeah, I mean, you need, like, you in any kind of mass left wing project, you would need anarchists to prevent um, the whole thing from getting kind of centralized and overly dominated by something like like Stalin in the Soviet Union or something like that. I think that's a kind of natural outcome of left politics, without, if you don't have the kind of the left libertarian or anarchist kind of counterweight. So that's why I would say anarchism is important. But like I said, it's not exactly going to bat for it. Honestly, I think a lot of anarchism is also bullshit. Like, a lot of like organized anarchism today is like bullshit, I think, for the most part. I mean, there are some cool people. I've met some cool people in that kind of world, but um yeah, I don't, it's not like, as a kind of organized force, I don't think it really represents much. What do you guys think? Type me some other shit. What do you got? I've never seen a serious leftist anarchist over 25. Yeah. Yeah, it's good. Unless they're a professor and super dense. Yeah, that's pretty true, I think. To be fair, I think I have definitely met some serious left anarchists over 25. Um, but I think to find them, you have to go, well, one, you're right. I guess you can find professors. But other than that, you have to go to kind of like the cities where kind of radical left people tend to congregate. So I know, like, in Philadelphia, for instance, like, all the radical folks live in West Philly, or at least it's very concentrated with radical folks. And if you go there, you'll definitely, like, I definitely know old school anarchists, like fully grown folks who are anarchists, but they, to be able to do that just sociologically and kind of psychologically, to be a kind of active identifying member of a super fringe ideology, you have to, over beyond just like the youth period of life, you have to go find people like that, and you have to have at least a few of them around you, or else, you just can't sustain like mental everyday ideological identifications that are so fringe, that have absolutely no power or reality, really, unless you surround yourself with other people who also identify in the same way. So that's why I think so. Like in West Philly, for instance, you can find plenty of full grown adult anarchists, or like in the UK in Brighton, they have like a very significant kind of anarchist, anti-fascist, whatever presence in Brighton. So I know some people there who are basically anarchists. And actually, I mean, in Southampton, I know a few older anarchists for sure. Um, yeah, Behave Yourself says there are a lot of social costs associated with being serious about totally fringe ideas. Yeah, that's a good point. There are definitely social costs associated with being serious about totally fringe ideas. Um, on the left and the right, I think that's true. Behave Yourself says, I think there are a bunch of weirdos and fringe movements because since they have less of a social network, the cost is lower to be earnest about your weird beliefs. Yeah, I think that's an astute observation. Or also, you could just say that, um, they carefully prune their social network down to the people who have their shared weird beliefs. But I think your larger insight is right, that like if you are embedded in a large social network of like normal people whose opinions are kind of embedded in mainstream culture, then yeah, it's going to be really hard to sustain serious kind of mental investment in fringe ideologies, because it what a lot of people don't realize about having fringe like having kind of radical political beliefs, whether it be on the left or the right, is there's a serious kind of mental taxation that occurs when you interact with like normal people who think your ideas are kind of ridiculous. Like, even if you believe that they're true, you have to kind of churn your gears more than normal people do. And yeah, it's taxing emotionally and cognitively. And so yeah, I think what you're saying is true, that uh in other words, yeah, what you're saying is, like, I think that's another way of saying what you're saying. In other words, behave yourself. That the less of a social network you have, the lower is the cost of being honest about what you think. Yeah, with the assumption that the social network you do have has been kind of limited to the people you agree with. You say there's also a sense in which holding some beliefs is a marker of being part of a group. Yeah, for sure, for sure. Most groups have some form of like symbolic border policing, where there are like certain terms you use or certain beliefs you have to kind of support to express your kind of basic group membership. That is generally true. Yes. An extreme example would be growing up as a Mormon or something like that. Yeah, right. Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, like, radical ideologies on the right and the left are basically religions. They're surrogates for religion. So I think the comparison to Mormonism or something like that is absolutely appropriate. And I think this is especially interesting when you think about kind of the decline of like traditional religious belief. Like, most people with radical ideologies, at least on the left, are very opposed to organized religion and are often atheists or agnostics or whatever. But they can't help but basically recapitulate a basic religious worldview in their ideologies. Ideologies are constantly basically replacing what was destroyed in the rise of secularism. So yeah, I think that's one of the biggest contradictions, actually, and one of the most deep and significant contradictions of people on the radical left. If they're kind of like grounded in a modern secular anti-religious kind of attitude, they're not actually able to sustain their radical political ideology without basically religious structures, and almost no one is willing to really think through how deep that goes, and the challenges it implies if you want to actually have radical politics. All right, Matt Earnshaw, what's up, dude? You're asking, I'm curious about your use of the bell curve in your lectures. I think the basic point about taking unequal distribution of capacities as given is good, but two things. All right, it's getting interesting. Thanks, Matt. Let's see what else Matt is saying. One, there's no need to take it as fated, i.e., we can change nature, and we can emphasize that. Xenofeminism, nice. And although granted, this requires us to affirm uneven distribution as a starting point, which is what I find so admirable about Firestone. The starting point of her argument is basically, yes, women are biologically inferior. Interesting. I think Matt might be typing some more, but I'll give him some time. But yeah, this is super interesting lines of thought. I'm curious to know if there's anywhere else you're going with this. You gave a number 1, so I'm expecting that there'll be a subpoint 2. Anyone else want to chime in about the bell curve, IQ, personality differences, these sorts of things? I agree that there's no need to take it as fated. That's for sure. And Matt says, secondly, what is IQ? I'm sure you're aware of the racial history of it, but beyond that, high IQ people seem singularly dull. All right. So there's a lot there. I basically agree with the first part of Matt's question. I completely agree. There's no need to take intelligence differences or personality trait differences between different individuals or different groups of individuals as fated. You can change those things. I don't know anyone who denies that. So I completely agree. And as Matt kind of suggests, there is totally a kind of feminist path to grappling seriously with genetic differences and things like intelligence and personality traits. You can totally take that seriously and accept those data, and still totally affirm things like radical feminism. You just have to do it in a slightly different way than, well, a significantly different way, I should say, than many people are currently doing it. Because for the most part, I mean, like contemporary mainstream feminism is like based on, at its core, certain philosophical ideas about what human beings are or are not. And those deep commitments, in particular, the idea of the human being as a blank slate that can be almost without limit changed and manipulated according to kind of social constructions or environmental manipulations. Basically, that is basically a kind of deep-seated philosophical investment on the part of contemporary feminism for the most part. But I completely agree with Matt Earnshaw that there is a way to still get to the radical feminist implications and conclusions without going through that particular blank slate philosophical foundation. So I basically, the first part of Matt's question, my answer is basically yes, I agree. Take uneven distributions as a real starting point, but figure out what a feminism would look like from there. I think that's like totally possible and the best path. But let's talk about these other things. So Matt asks, what is IQ? I'm sure you're aware of the racial history of it. But beyond that, high IQ people seem singularly dull. Okay, so that's basically 3 questions. I can basically do one at a time. Real quick, Behave Yourself says, you can look at the literature on twin studies, same genes, different environment, same outcome. Right. Yeah. So I'll talk about that in a minute. So I should say, just as a caveat of full disclosure, I'm not like a particularly focused social scientist on IQ. Like I don't specialize on that or anything. I haven't done research myself. I'm not even a psychologist. I mean, I'm a political scientist. I know a little bit about political psychology, and I read widely in different fields. So that's my only expertise here. But I can tell you what IQ is as a social scientist who's basically familiar with the literature, although as an outsider. IQ is basically the measure of intelligence. It's a measure, I should say, of intelligence in human beings. So intelligence is a concept. Machines can have intelligence. Humans can have intelligence. Intelligence is an abstract concept, and IQ is a measure of it in the human. And so what does it measure or represent? That's debatable. And in some sense, it's somewhat mysterious, but just like kind of consciousness is mysterious. But we can say that more or less IQ is it's something like the capacity to solve problems, basically, for all intents and purposes. IQ is a scale that has been designed by social scientists to have certain properties, right? So it's centered at 100, and it's a bell curve. It's a normal distribution. In other words, there's more or less equal numbers on both sides of it, and an overwhelming majority of people are kind of centered around the middle. And what it measures is human capacities to solve all different kinds of problems in all different domains. Okay, so that's what it is. And people have tried to theorize other forms of intelligence. For instance, a popular idea is this idea of like emotional intelligence, and other concepts also have been suggested. But what happens, and what's important to understand about a lot of the research is, or like what social science research is in general, is like you can have a bunch of different concepts that you try to measure in human beings or something like that. But you can't just come up with your own concept, and just because it has a conceptual abstract difference from some other concept, that doesn't mean it's a legit dimension of human variation. So there are lots of things you have to do to kind of be confident that a concept of human being or some dimension of human variation that you're interested in, to be able to know that that's a legit thing going on in human beings. There are lots of kind of empirical challenges that you have to meet to be able to do that. So IQ is basically one of the strongest dimensions that emerges that describes like basic human problem solving capacity for the most part. And all of the efforts to identify other kind of competitor forms of intelligence or competitive forms of problem solving, they haven't, you can't really statistically distinguish them from like the one main dimension, which comes out through all of the research time and time again. And that one main dimension is called IQ. So basically, there's one dimension of kind of human capacity that more or less measures our ability to solve problems in across domains, and that's IQ. That's like not a very sophisticated answer. It's not, doesn't pretend to be like a very technical or super educated question. Or answer. That's just a basic, low level, I hope, like tractable explanation of what it is. So the next part of the question is, I'm sure you're aware of the racial history of it. Yeah, so that's a really good question. I mean, I think that there is, like, all of modern science has a fucked up racial history. Like, all of modern science was carried out by, most of it was carried out by like really old-fashioned folks with really often nasty and racist and false notions about human beings and their differences, for sure. I think that's pretty hard to deny. It also doesn't in any way invalidate like whatever legitimate empirical patterns that have been detected by legit social scientific methods. So I mean, I think it's not always easy or clear, but it's not in principle an unreasonable idea that all of modern history, some of it is going to be kind of racist, stupid, nasty, and incorrect vocabularies or assumptions, and often techniques and methodologies. Like, there are lots of cases of racist or colonialist scientists executing experiments and things like that in really brutal, horrific, unreasonable ways against like different races and things like this. The history of modern science is filled with that sort of shit, and it's terrible. And I don't think there's any getting around that. It can also be true that even those like fucked up racist people, if they were using scientific method correctly, it's possible for like fucked up people with racist and wrong ideas to also like in some way be part of some tradition that has something to do with like real empirical phenomena that might also be independent of the horrific and false things that they think. So I think that's like super uncomfortable for people, especially if you have a kind of social constructionist attitude towards the world. If you really think that like all of science is socially constructed, then the a bunch of racist scientists would seem to be enough to completely invalidate an entire scientific like research field, because you would reasonably think that everything that they do and all of their findings are kind of infected by their social constructions. But if you have a different view on the nature of society and science, and you think that basically there is an objective reality that we don't have full access to, but we can get some access to it through scientific method, and scientific method doesn't give a fuck about the subjective views or opinions of the scientists. It's the whole point of science is that you're connecting with objective reality, and you're making optimal inferences from objective reality in a way that is completely severed from your subjective feelings and wishes and views on the world. The whole point of science is that severing of the object and the subject. So the reality is, it's a difficult and awkward reality, is that science, the history of science, is laced with racists and all kinds of horrible false notions and vocabularies and shit like that in people. And also, nonetheless, it is a history of empirical progress in understanding the nature of the objective world. So that's a kind of long and abstract answer. But more generally, I would say that like contemporary research on things like intelligence is not racist. Like, sure, there were racists who had really kind of fucked up false notions about different races and the whole like phrenology shit. There like back in the 19th century, there was lots of like really stupid shit that was harmful and yeah, racist and bad science, right? But today, IQ is not. I mean, it's just not racist. It's a measure. It's a measure of people's problem solving capacities, basically. It's highly predictive, and it varies systematically across people in ways that really matter. Okay, so I mean, I just don't. Um, I think, in other words, you have to separate um, racist histories in science, which are real and should be acknowledged and admitted, and all of that, and also try to separate out like objective phenomena. And Matt says, I'm not indicting science because of the people that do it. Yeah, no, I wasn't imputing that to you. That's a good point. But I think I'm only commenting on that because a lot of people basically do that. Like a lot of people basically say, some point in history there were like racist scientists who, studied, um, you know, uh, brain, or I should say like skull sizes and stuff like that. And there are these sort of well-known tropes about racist scientists. And like, yeah, definitely there were stupid racist scientists. But a lot of people do think that basically means like all of the contemporary study of IQ is therefore racist. And that's just, a lot of people do think that, but that's really not reasonable. It's not at all um, sensible. Like you can't throw out, like, look, there are objective patterns, and then, you know, there are objective patterns, and you can't just kind of like wave them away with criticisms of like people who thought and wrote like centuries ago. Yeah, we've seen this with math recently, as Matt says. Maybe a confected story, but wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, I'm sure I wouldn't doubt it. Anyway, I guess that's probably enough on that stuff. What else? Oh yeah, so there's one thing that Matt was asking us about also, is that beyond that, high IQ people seem singularly dull. I think this is like actually a wide. Oh, I'll show real quick. Someone asked me in the conversation, what is my IQ? And I mean, I'd rather not talk about that because I don't really like want to. I mean, it's not that high, or it's not low, but it's like, well, how should I put this? I mean, it's not like, it's like probably, I think it's, I'll just say, I think it's like between like plus or minus a few points around like 130, I think, based on like the estimates that I made, which is like pretty high. It's like I'm a pretty smart dude. Yeah, like I have a PhD, whatever. I'm a professor, so that's like I'm a pretty smart dude. But the thing is that in like the world of like intellectual producers more generally, like geniuses, like I'm nothing. Like I'm on the dumber end of like intellectuals, basically, that at least that I like think about and relate to, and am interested in kind of conversing with, or whatever. Like the people that I look up to as intellectuals, I'm like way behind them, basically. And like I'm never going to be Nobel Prize winner. You're just not, unless you're like super super high IQ. So I'm not one of those at all. Like I'm just like kind of smart. I hope that answers the question. And God loves all his children. Thanks, behave yourself. Yes, I agree. God loves all his children. It's okay. So yeah, what else? Honestly, but that's just an estimate, and I did that based on like a conversion table that I found between like SAT scores and GRE scores, converting that to IQ, because SAT scores are basically our IQ tests. So that was, I took my SATs and GREs like a long time ago, so take all that with a grain of salt. Yeah. Okay. So what other questions? Oh yeah, so Matt was asking this idea about this thing that I think a lot of people see or feel, which is that high IQ people are probably like really kind of boring brainiacs who are kind of just like locked into the high level problem solving that they're interested in, but they're kind of dull anyway. And hang on one sec, let's see. Matt's saying again, historical deployment of an idea doesn't invalidate it, but I remain skeptical on the value of this measure. I will have to find another way to formulate my objections, though. Yeah, Matt. I mean, before I move on, I would say I think that it's good to be skeptical. I think I'm also skeptical, to be honest. I'm interested in what IQ fails to measure. Like, I don't think it's like some end all be all measure that tells us everything about what's interesting about basic human powers or something like that. It's just one thing, and what it measures is kind of mysterious. So there are reasons to be skeptical, I think, and I basically agree with that. So what someone said to me on Twitter today, which I think is a really good point, which I also basically agree with, is they said, quote unquote, horsepower isn't everything. I think that's a really nice little slogan, because I totally agree. I think IQ is something, and it's real, and it's really important for people's powers to do different types of tasks. I think that's undeniable, and you have to take that seriously if you want to have any kind of at all serious kind of model of what human beings are. But that's horsepower ain't everything. I really like that slogan. One of the things I think about a lot personally, one of the kind of pathways to criticizing or thinking critically about IQ that I'm interested in is ethical, something like ethical sophistication, or ethics. I don't know exactly how to put it, because I think that being intelligent does not necessarily make you more ethical or like a better person normatively. And so if you think about morality or ethics, I prefer ethics to morality. If you think about that as a larger kind of more abstract game that sort of subsumes all of the particular domains in which someone might be skilled or unskilled, then in some sense, I think there is like something potentially higher than intelligence that high IQ people are kind of orthogonal to, that IQ is orthogonal to, and that high IQ can actually be, almost inversely related to, or not quite inversely related to, but that there can be a trade-off, I think, between IQ and some kind of higher kind of ethical normative kind of capacity for reflection. So the way that I think about that in particular is like that I really like the distinction between instrumental rationality and substantive rationality. So that's something that I've been teaching all about. That's been one of the main themes of this module that I'm teaching right now. Module is what they call classes in the UK. So this class that I'm teaching right now, I think that basically, I know that basically, if you look at like the definitions of intelligence is basically instrumental rationality. So it's like, how effectively and efficiently can you solve a particular task? In other words, how effectively? Yeah, it's like the orthogonality thesis. I can talk about that in a second. But what I'm saying is definitely different than that, I think. Bostrom, well, just as a quick aside, Bostrom thinks that intelligence and values are ultimately orthogonal, but he has this idea of the convergence thesis, which is that in sort of the short and medium term, any entity with increasing intelligence is going to want to increase certain to meet certain goals in the short and medium run. So things like resource acquisition is something that every intelligent entity is going to kind of converge on and want to maximize, no matter what their long-term values or goals are. Even though Bostrom thinks that values and intelligence are ultimately orthogonal. So yeah, that's obviously related to what I'm saying, but it's not exactly the same thing. And in fact, one of the things I'm really trying to think about is precisely how the critique of instrumental rationality, which is an idea from kind of continental philosophy and kind of radical social theory from the left, actually, how the critique of instrumental rationality fits in with contemporary thinking about artificial intelligence, actually. So yeah, exactly what is the relationship between that critique and the more empirically sophisticated work coming out right now on the prospects for artificial intelligence. So just continuing with kind of the riff that I was on before, I was saying that I think, there were all these people in the 20th century who basically saw that there was something really toxic about instrumental rationality. Instrumental rationality just being yeah, basically, how efficiently and effectively can you find the means to arrive at a certain ends, right? Um, Obviously, capitalism is all about instrumental rationality. Human beings have become extremely instrumentally rational, and right. So, but the problem with modernity, as a lot of people have seen it, from someone like Max Weber, one of the founders of social science, to up to someone like Theodor Adorno of the Frankfurt School, there's this critique of instrumental rationality, which says, well, any person or society that is too obsessed with instrumental rationality is actually, in a larger sense, really irrational. Because and then they look at things like they look at the effects of capitalism in a kind of more abstract, general way, and look at things like, capitalism is really good at giving us goods and services, but how rational is it really when it's a system that like Ken Horkheimer fam, what's up, determinate negation? Thanks for chiming in. The critique basically being that capitalism is super rational internally, but it has all of these implications and effects that we would generally like to avoid, such as, for instance, like environmental degradation would be one just kind of classic example. So in that kind of larger sense, instrumental rationality is seen as irrational. I'm just giving you the basic rundown of that basic critique of instrumental rationality. And so, because instrumental rationality and intelligence are basically the same thing, I think that the critique of instrumental rationality and its resources actually has a kind of direct application to thinking about artificial intelligence. But I can continue that thought, but I'm getting distracted by all these questions popping up in the sidebar. So let's see. Horkheimer fam. So you're hanging on to land's intelligence equals capitalism equation, Matt Earnshaw asks. If you define intelligence as instrumental rationality, which you just did. Have I read Scott Alexander's Meditations? Okay, I'm going to bracket the question about Scott Alexander's piece. I'll talk about that after. Let's kind of try and tie up some loose ends on this discussion about intelligence. So I remember when I first started thinking about intelligence and how Nick Land writes about it, when I didn't really know much about it at all. My instinct was very much kind of like what a lot of people's kind of lefty critical instinct is, which is to think, well, what exactly is intelligence? Maybe intelligence is being incorrectly kind of reduced to this like very particular definition that might be excluding like some other thing. So I remember when I asked Nick Land what he thought, how he defined intelligence, and he basically said, the ability to win games, which is basically that it basically is instrumental rationality. I thought a lot about that, and I went and read about like how scientists define intelligence, both in the machine way, but also in the human way. And yeah, it became clear to me that is basically accurate, that intelligence is simply instrumental rationality. And that capitalism is basically the social generalization of intelligence at a kind of suprahuman level. Yeah, so I think that capitalism, it basically is this kind of machinic intelligence that is at an abstract level higher than human beings. So instrumental rationality, intelligence, and capitalism, I do see as all more or less kind of correlated or isomorphic in I guess you could say. And that's at least how I've been teaching it and how I've been thinking about it in the past few months in this class that I'm teaching. So yeah. But okay, so what I was saying before, though, the reason this is all interesting and I think like super worth exploring is that the critique of instrumental rationality does give us all of these really good reasons for thinking that basically, an overly instrumental attitude towards the world is in some larger sense irrational, that there is something stupid about it, in other words. So I've never quite been able to shake that. That seems very convincing to me that you can be super intelligent, i.e., instrumentally powerful and effective, and yet if you're oriented to values or goals or consequences that are not actually the ones that are best for you, or that you would, or let's say that are not as true as they could be. If you could find ends or goals that are more true, then instrumental rationality and intelligence could be in some crucial way stupid. And I don't have that fully worked out, but that seems to me to be a really promising little problem for further study. Have you read an essay called The Use of Knowledge in Society by Hayek? Seems like it would tie in nicely with the idea of capitalism, a kind of superintelligence. I have not read that book in particular, but I have read, the popular basic books by Hayek, like The Road to Serfdom. I did read that. I used to be like an Ayn Rand libertarian in high school. I read a bunch of that pro-capitalism stuff. Yeah. Does anyone else have thoughts about like this stuff around intelligence, rationality, capitalism? Do you want to make some points or ask any more questions on that? I'll go back through these other questions and see what other people are saying. What? Aren't you a Nazi? I'm not a fucking Nazi. Are you kidding? I'm going to hope that was a joke. When Matt Earnshaw says he's skeptical about how well controlled these predictions are. Well, oh yeah, right. So this is what someone else said earlier in the thread. A lot of the research on IQ and personality traits is really powerful because they do it. A lot of it is based on twin studies. And so twin studies are kind of like the gold standard because, two twins are genetically exactly the same, right? But if one goes into a different family than the other, that's a different environmental influence while holding the genetics constant. So if you have a bunch of cases like that, you can, in quite an impressive way, tease out, the contribution to the variance from, the different causal factors, whether it be genetics or environmental influence. So yeah, they're actually like pretty effective studies. What else we have here? What else, folks? What's on your mind? We got 8 people. All right, we're finally rolling. It was a little rough for the first 15, 20 minutes when it was just me and one other person or so. But now we got plenty of people. So what else do you want to talk about? Give me some other questions. I'd be curious to know, like, who are you people? Like, tell me about yourselves. One question I would be curious to know is, like, are most of you like on the left or are most of you on the right? Because I think my following now is like very weird and ambiguous. So I'd be curious. Oh, right. So Z-Hops asked me if I've read Scott Alexander's Meditations on Moloch. And I know Scott Alexander and I've read some of his pieces. And I think that was one of the pieces that I've looked at before, but I didn't read it very closely. If you asked me what it was about, I wouldn't be able to tell you because I forget. I think it's one of his pieces on like the culture wars, if I remember correctly. But yeah, no, I think he's super smart, has like really good pieces, but I don't remember that one in particular. If you want to tell me about it, or tell me why you find it interesting or what made you think of it just now, maybe we could talk about the idea. Behavior. Oh, so someone asks, how do you reconcile IQ researchers' implications of a natural hierarchy with your egalitarian leanings? Well, it's a good question. We kind of just talked about this, and I think that basically, if you admit that there are real differences between people, that's just the starting point. And then, you can creatively change nature in some way. You can't change it to an unlimited degree. You don't have complete power over things. But you can change it. So that's one part of the answer. And another thing I would add is that we don't know how much you can change it. So one problem that I think is really important about, and Matt, you might find this interesting based on what we were saying before. I think if there's one really promising kind of critique of IQ research and personality trait research, it's that they only are able to look at forms of environmental manipulation that are actually done by people to a degree that makes them, statistically studyable. So what that means, for instance, like if you look at, for instance, like twin studies where kids are, basically kids grow up in different families, and that's one of the ways that they tease out the effects of nature and nurture. Um, if you, sorry, I keep looking at the chat thing, and people's questions are totally distracting me, but that's my fault. Right. So if you look at those studies, if you think about it, they're only really able to measure the possible effect of environmental or social manipulations, nurture, in other words, that other people do, right? Because like if you're just looking at the difference between a family that an adopted kid grew up in and the biological family, you're only looking at a relatively small range of differences, namely like within the range of like what's basically normal in different families. What we don't know is what would happen to individuals' developments if we subjected them to like a drastically different environmental manipulation. We don't know that, and the research can't really speak to that, simply because there aren't enough cases of like extreme, unique, large scale, variations in the nurture variable, if you will. So that's one really promising and serious, legitimate empirical way to criticize IQ and personality research, that the relevant experimental manipulation that radical, egalitarian folks are interested in hasn't really been measured. That I think is really interesting. So the question, of course, is like, if you gave me like a bunch of infants to raise myself, and you gave me like multiple millions, give me millions and millions of dollars to do whatever I wanted to raise like a bunch of infants. And let's say just hypothetically, you had each of those infants had a genetic twin, an identical twin somewhere else. We could probably come up with a totally crazy, unique kind of environment or situation to raise these infants in over the course of 20 years, let's say. And we could, if we design that with like in extremely unique ways that we thought were like super, let's say, egalitarian or supportive of human flourishing in a way that capitalism is not able to provide in almost any context, then you could look at the long-term effects of how those people grow up compared to their twins. That would be like, that hasn't really been tried. So that would be super interesting. And that might just show actually that like you can have more of an effect through, nurture, in other words, or social environmental changes than, kind of right-leaning people think. That would be like a legitimate scientific way to think about it. So someone else says, okay, let's see. A bunch of things going on here. James says, I recently found out my IQ is in the average range, and I liked your comments about how knowing your actual IQ can help you feel more at ease with yourself. Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad you agree with that. Matt says, Reza's book is going to blow all this stuff about intelligence out of the water. For those of you who might not know, he's talking about Reza Negarestani. Is that how you pronounce the name? I think, who's a philosopher who writes about intelligence. I've never actually read much of his stuff, so I don't know. But I will duly note that you have high hopes for that book. Maybe I will finally get around to reading him. There are significant problems with the Landian intelligence equals problem-solving equation, but I'm not lucid enough to really dig into this now. I think it's quite technical. Yeah, Matt. I agree. I agree. There are definitely some important questions to that, and I'm actively basically trying to think it through. I mean, one thing, I'm actually writing a paper about this. One thing I can tell you that will be half lucid and maybe will be interesting to you, I hope, is that I have this idea, which I'm still trying to work out, but I have this idea, which I can tell you just the basic intuition of it. The intuition is that if we were to be able to develop artificial intelligence in a way that it were to, embark on a kind of takeoff scenario, like the ones that are analyzed by Bostrom, in which, basically it becomes recursive and a generalized artificial intelligence is able to improve itself in such a way that you see kind of exponential kind of takeoff in artificial intelligence power. This is the big question about like what would happen then, right? Well, I had this sort of idea that there is some reason to believe that if there were to be a the takeoff of a super intelligent entity, that at a certain point it would choose to auto terminate. It's this idea that I've been thinking about for a long time, which I kind of in my own mind I label it as the open quote rational rest hypothesis. And it's basically it's based on this sort of instinct or intuition that I got from people like Adorno and Horkheimer, which is that at a certain stage in intelligence becoming conscious of itself, which I think we represent in some sense, it's what human consciousness is, I think, in some sense. You actually get insight into the futility of most kind of short-term instrumental goals. And so there is something, it seems to me that there is something about in the nature of intelligence that does exceed the instrumental. And when it does exceed the instrumental, when intelligence, in other words, applies itself to not, the selection of optimal means to achieve certain ends, but when, in other words, substantive rationality, what the Frankfurt School calls substantive rationality, which is basically reflection on the truth of the whole. When intelligence is applied to substantive rationality, there is a tendency for it to realize the rationality of ceasing and just chilling out. In other words, it's a kind of anti-growth or anti-productive kind of insight that seems to be kind of baked into the path that is the evolution of intelligence, as indicated in human consciousness. I think this is reflected in all of the religious traditions in some degree, Buddhism most obviously, right? But also in kind of critical philosophy with the Frankfurt School. So this idea of rational rest, I think, seems to be something that emerges from intelligence, but it's obviously not reducible to instrumental rationality, or it's something like when instrumental rationality reflects on itself, it opens up this sort of different set of implications. And yeah, that might be one thing that I think is not fully worked out by the standard view on intelligence, but that's just my kind of one particular philosophical problematic that I find promising. All right, let's see what else people are saying. Behave Yourself says, I wish my ego wasn't so fragile and I could admit to things like that. LOL. Well, I mean, if your ego is based on IQ, that's kind of dumb. No offense. But that's just like a bad way to structure your sense of your own self-worth. Like, there's so many other things other than intelligence. And also, someone said that, like, probably said this kind of jokingly, but there's a serious insight to this idea that we are kind of all equal in the eyes of God, so to speak, whether you believe in God or not. Like, I think, like, human worth or human value and dignity, it's not actually conditional on things like intelligence. Like, that's just capitalism. Capitalism values intelligence because it's useful. But in some sense, you can just be, if you're super intelligent, you can just be like more fully enslaved than other people, I think, in some ways. So I wouldn't let your ego rest on intelligence. Zehop says that I should reread it. Meditations on Moloch. The basic point seems to be that problems in society, the problems of capitalism, are caused by game theory, instrumental rationality. Oh, okay, interesting. Yeah, so I'm definitely sympathetic to that. Maybe I should look back into it then. He also thinks superintelligence could solve most of the problems if we control the problem. Right. Well, that's a big if, but interesting. Okay, I'll have to have another look at that. Sounds good. Sounds interesting. Matt says, about myself, if you insist. Clearly, I'm on the left, but I identify a lot with where you've been coming from recently. And I've listened to a significant chunk of your stuff. Oh, thanks, Matt. Cool to hear. And I'm also all about Neo-Rat. Cool. Okay. Good to know. Anyone else want to share where they're coming from? I think that's what a lot of people that I talk with and interact with online, I think a lot of them are people who are kind of lefties, but kind of more interested in some of the more edgelording propositions, I think, in a way that is, like, not really acceptable on the organized public mainstream left, but but is not like at all racist or, like even alt-right. Like I don't think there's much that I actually think that is, like actually very right wing or like alt-righty. Or it's nothing I think is like too edgelording, but the fact that I've recently, I've recently discovered the legitimate academic research on IQ, for instance. Like all of a sudden that means that I'm like not allowed in the left, basically, in some way. But whatever. What do the rest of you think? What are we into tonight? Well, actually, it's already 9 o'clock, so that was a good hour. That was fun. That was interesting. I appreciate you folks coming. We could keep talking if everyone wants to chime in, or if no one's got anything else to chip in with, then I might just wrap it up in a minute. No rush though. Matt says, I'm trying to escape left book edgelording. Yes, exactly. That is why I'm talking into my computer right now with 8 people who I do not know personally, because left book is basically I basically a few months ago I kind of like I was about to say snapped, but I wouldn't even say snapped because it was like not at all. It was not a bang, but a whimper that with which I became like incapable of even like logging on to Facebook anymore. It's like the chorus of like sameness, the chorus of just like dull, repetitive, hyper predictable sameness is just like, I find it so embarrassing, to be honest, that like it really it just drags me down to even look at it. So yeah, left book is like that is a real like brain killer, man. That's a good way to get dumber. If you want to learn how to decrease your IQ, follow a whole shitload of people who are leftists on Facebook and read that shit every day. Whether I'm countering edgelording with edgelording is another matter. Yeah, well, we all have to have our little cultural groups, and we all have to have like our own ways of, being exploratory and being slightly transgressive. Like, humans have some threshold. People have all humans have, different thresholds, let's say, but all humans have like some thresholds of like transgression and edginess that they need to just feel like they're mentally alive. Okay, so I don't think that edgelording is necessarily a bad thing. It's like an amusement. It's a kind of verbal, intellectual form of collective excitation, and I think people have the right to that to some degree. So whatever. Behave Yourself says, I'm a right-wing anarchist and have some traditionalist beliefs. Please no bully. Don't worry, we won't bully you, or at least I won't. I would not want other people to either. So right-wing anarchist, that's fine with me. I don't know exactly what that means, but I would be interested to know if you want to explain a little bit more about what right-wing anarchism is. Or I guess my question to you, Behave Yourself, would be is like, how is it different than fascism? I'm not accusing you of that, but that's what maybe some people would ask. So I'd be curious to hear, or maybe you are a fascist. In which case, that would be good to know if you want to speak up. I would like to know the truth of who I'm dealing with here. What else we got? Someone says a lapsed Marxist here, right? So another lefty who's not really can't really play that full game anymore. I found out about you through your podcast with Fleischman. Cool. Thanks, Z Hops. Good to know you. Yeah, my podcast with Diana was like kind of a watershed for me because I lost a bunch of friends on the left. They thought like the idea of talking with someone like Diana is itself like unacceptable. But through Diana, I met, a lot of, she's like, that podcast got me a lot of followers who follow Diana and are like big fans of her. She has like a very kind of like strong little cult following on the web. So a few people from her, started interacting with me. So that's been cool. So I lost some friends, but I gained some new ones. So that's cool. Behave Yourself says, I drink a lot from lefty sources. I think it's all great when it's about ideas and not just furthering the weird social clique. Yep. Well put. Behave Yourself says, state and coercion are bad. Trade and money are good. Okay, cool. Yeah, so is that kind of like free market anarchism? I don't know much about that, but it sounds like that's what you're saying. It's not obvious to me there's a precise enough definition. of fascism to say anything meaningful about it. But if it's anything to do with exalting the state and centralization, then I'm nauseated by it. Okay, yeah, I think that would definitely be a necessary component of fascism is, yes, the exaltation of the state and centralization. So yeah, I haven't read much of this sort of like free market anarchism stuff and whatever. I don't know much. I don't know anything really about the writings of like the anarcho-capitalist crews, but yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I'm intrigued by it a bit. I can't really speak to it, but I think I could see how you could be how you could be a kind of like radically supportive of free markets from a kind of left-wing perspective. Yeah. It all sounds insane at first, Behave Yourself says. Yeah. But, honestly, like ideology today is so insane all around. Like I feel like the ideological coordinates have become so scrambled that, it was like, what exactly is the left and what exactly is the right? In particular, kind of like the authoritarian developments within the left, or the kind of latent, let's say, subtle authoritarian tendencies within the left, to me are so like peculiar and just like profound and deep and weird, that honestly, like, I have a very open mind towards any particular ideological label. Like, I don't take it at face value, in the sense of I don't judge any book by its cover, because I don't think that anyone is really clear today about like what things even mean, really, like what basic terms mean, like what the left is, what the right is. I really don't think many people have a very clear and compelling grasp on what these words mean today, because the thing is that they mean substantially different things to different people. And I think this is, I don't think we really know what that means. Like, we don't know how to process the fact that like different ideological clusters have fundamentally different life worlds with entirely different vocabularies, that are mutually exclusive with the other ideological life worlds, if you will. So, I mean, it's a very strange thing when a social, when a civilization reaches a point where like basic vocabulary means literally like 20 different things to 20 different groups. And when you're thinking and speaking into a cyberspace where potentially members from all of those different groups could be interpreting your message, and yet each word that you use has 10 different meanings to 10 different groups. I mean, we we don't know how to do that. We don't know what that means for a civilization. And I don't think because it's so hard to even really process what that challenge is, what that even means. In other words, like what game we're actually playing. If we want to talk about instrumental rationality and intelligence, if it's the ability to win games, well, we very few people even really have a compelling sense of what exactly is the game we're embedded in this, with respect to those, especially things like ideological coordinates. And so it's like, yeah, shit is way more complicated than people think. I'd recommend The Problem of Political Authority by Michael Huemer. Okay, cool, good to know. Check it out. Anyone else got anything they're dying to get out or dying to talk about? I have to be honest, I was kind of hoping like people would join me in the chat, like there'd be other faces or at least like avatars, and we would kind of like take turns actually speaking. I guess I shouldn't have been. I guess this was kind of predictable that people would just want to use the chat. So I don't blame you. It's all good. It's fine with me. But maybe some other time people will like join me in chat. Charlie Fear asks, do you think that AI could result in a successful technocracy rather than capitalism or communism? Yeah, maybe. Like I said at the beginning of this video, I think that like predictions about artificial intelligence are way underpowered. And I think there's way more uncertainty than anyone wants to admit, because it's not a very sexy answer. Like when someone asks you a question, you want to give them like the best answer you can give that's interesting and useful. But that's a kind of bias, like often the right and truly correct answer is like, I have no fucking clue, and no one really does. But that is so unsatisfying that people there's a significant kind of bias against that sort of answer, right? So that would be my honest answer, is that like what exactly is going to happen with AI is radically underdetermined, or overdetermined, depending on how you use that word. But the point being, radically difficult to know. But could one result be a successful technocracy rather than capitalism or communism? Well, I don't know. It's not immediately clear how that would work. I think it's probably going to be either intensified capitalism, or something that exceeds our current kind of descriptive capacities. But a successful technocracy seems to me probably unlikely. If by technocracy you mean like some like elite panel of humans, I guess, combined in some way with super intelligent entities kind of ordering things around. I just don't see how that would be like a final equilibrium, because it seems like if you're going to have that level of kind of advanced intelligence, then that equilibrium is going to give way to a kind of competitive situation that would basically become capitalism in some way. Yeah, I don't know. I do think I am kind of hopeful for possible kind of communistic alternative pathways, but one of the things that's interesting about that kind of set of predictions that you sometimes hear is that all the people that are intelligently at all reflecting on kind of radical left-wing communist futures, they like to talk a little bit about artificial intelligence. There's this kind of trendy stuff around like fully automated luxury communism, for instance. But that's mostly a rhetorical move. It's interesting, and I am interested in that. I'm sympathetic to the futures such as the one that is kind of like aesthetically hinted at in full, the hashtag fully automated luxury communism. But the thing is, like, all the people who are talking about that sort of stuff are not empirically serious. And I don't mean that as an attack or anything, but so for instance, like one of their like strongest kind of intellectual representatives is someone like Paul Mason. And I don't know how many of you would have read the book Post-Capitalism, but I think that's basically as close, or like Inventing the Future by Sir and Williams. These books are kind of like as advanced as that kind of perspective gets in giving a kind of serious intellectual pathway as to like how the left-wing like communist AI path plays out. And my reading of it personally, I mean, I've read that stuff pretty closely, and I have thought about it a fair bit. My sense is that it's just not empirically serious. I mean, it's interesting and suggestive, perhaps might have some interesting insights, but people don't realize how difficult and demanding it is to make compelling and convincing statements about empirical dynamics. Like you have to be like pretty close to the data, and you have to hold yourself to like pretty difficult and onerous like social scientific constraints, basically. And I won't bore you all with like going over what like legitimate social scientists have to do to make inferences from data. But as someone who knows about that and does that in his own work, I mean, you just can't like tell these grand narratives about like Kondrashiev waves and how like cyclical history is going to turn the corner in any moment now, and capitalism is going to be subsumed by communist robotics, like and you can't just like call for some sort of like social movement that is going to magically like make it happen without being able to diagram very precisely how those inferences are based on like data that exists. So if you don't have that, I don't really buy it. I mean, interestingly, like a book like Bostrom's book on AI is not it's not data driven per se, but it's a level of empirical sophistication that is impressive and legitimate for making like plausible inferences about like possible causal pathways, whereas like someone like Paul Mason just doesn't even really try to do what someone like Nick Bostrom does. So I think that there is room to do that. Like I think that you actually could you could do much more interesting things towards, the fully automated luxury communism kind of like vision of the future than, have yet been done. But I think that what has been done is like just not very empirically serious is kind of my view on it. Oh, Behave Yourself says that I have to share the link to join in the video. Oh, right. Okay, that makes sense. That explains why no one joined in. Well, I'll do that next time. No point in doing it now. Good to know. You're right. Matt Earnshaw is asking why if you could join the chat. Yeah, I was intending this to be like I thought anyone could enter. I forgot that I had to give you the link. I'll do that next time. So Matt says that he agrees that fully automated luxury communism is not empirically serious, but neither is Bostrom. Right. I kind of agreed with that, but yeah, I think Bostrom is much more empirically serious. Let's see. Any other points I missed? These days. Oh, hey, Tracy. How's it going, dude? These days, my favored label for myself is radical liberal. I particularly like the recent defense of that term by Jason Lee Bias. Cool. I haven't seen that, but I can see that. Radical liberal. I hear people use the phrase like radical centrist. It's interesting. I have kind of some thoughts on that, but I tell you what, I think I'm getting a little burned out, folks. I've been kind of blabbering for like an hour and a half now. So, sorry if there's a few questions I didn't quite get to, but I hope this was interesting to you. Yeah, sorry, I meant for you all to be able to enter the chat and like be able to like pop your faces up and actually talk with your voices and choose to have video of yourself if you want to, or just use a picture. So sorry that I forgot to give you the link. That's so obvious. I thought you could just jump in. But in the future, I'll put a link up so that you can actually come and chat in person. I suspect that most people would just want to do the live chat text-based anyway, so it probably wouldn't be that different. But in the future, you'll be able to jump in and actually interact with me. Sorry, I didn't give you the link. Yeah, there might have been a few questions I didn't get to, but just hold those thoughts and share them with me next time, and I'd be happy to follow up on anything we talked about here. So thank you, folks. You have spared me from going to a bar to get drunk just to kill time and to talk with boring people who I probably don't want to talk to. This was more interesting, and I appreciate your questions and for spending this time with me. So stay in touch with me. Shoot me a message on whatever you want or whatever. Write me emails, whatever you want. If you want to talk about any of this or stay in touch. Yeah, cool. Thanks, folks. See you later.